Photography is often called the universal hobby. It is a means of creative expression within the reach of people in all walks of life, and it speaks a language that everyone can understand.
Hi there. A lot of photographers start saying things like, I'm only going to be photographing for myself, after they've had a few, unsuccessful bids at getting recognition. Maybe their photographs weren't accepted by galleries or to magazines, or they didn't win the competitions, or worst of all, their mother was the only person who clicked like on their Instagram post. So then you decide that you're not going to show your work, but this isn't where your questioning should end. In this video, I'm going to try to break down the process of trying to work out exactly who you are photographing for. And this question will obviously overlap a little with, why am I a photographer? It's important to find an answer to the original question, because if you don't, your subconscious will quickly pose a follow-up issue, which is really undermining. And that is, why should I bother to photograph at all? This will determine whether you take your camera with you on your next trip outside, or whether you set aside time to photograph at all.
What a great photographer does is they are consistently able to make something in a style that's personal to themselves. If I go out into the hallway, I carry a camera with me.
It's rare for anyone who's creative to totally accept that it doesn't matter if anyone else interacts with their work. It means that you're 100% fine with the idea of taking photographs and then privately appreciating the results. You've got to work out, is this enough to motivate your photographic practice? But there are other ways of interpreting the idea of photographing for oneself. In the self-help section of bookshops, you'll always find a few books that encourage creativity as a form of meditation, relaxation, or healing of some kind. I do think that the act of creating is as beneficial as having a regular exercise routine. Hobbies are now an old-fashioned concept, but they were a big thing before television and the internet. Just on a very basic level, there's value in getting an intent together and then focusing on a task and then achieving an outcome. In order to photograph, one's forced to get out into the world and interact with other people. Another way to look at the practice of photography is that it feeds one's passion, a passion for self-expression. If you're able to overcome the impulse to compare your practice or your work with that of others, then you can cultivate purpose solely from the act of photographing. I found it telling that my series of 2 dogs jumping on the beach came about without any forethought and definitely no planning about what I was going to do with the pictures. It involved no real effort, no traveling, but as a series it's been exhibited more often than any other essay that I've produced. My only thoughts at the time were that I wanted to take a series of photographs that captured their gymnastics. So this conversation about who we're photographing for has now expanded to include the idea that it's a healthy thing to do on many levels, and there's joy to be found in seeking out beauty. As soon as one switches one's intent towards something that resembles career ambition, then a whole number of new factors come into play. In the creative domain, the chances of fame and fortune are definitely minuscule. So if you head along this path, then your passion must be strong enough to push you through the multiple disappointments that are bound to happen. I'm not in any way suggesting that it isn't worth pursuing an ambitious path with your photography. It's just that statistically the chances of success on a world level are extremely low. And you have to weigh up whether your determination matches your ambitions. In this sphere, the question still remains, who are you photographing for? If it's for social media likes or some real or fantasy gallery curator, then you have to ask, is what they want similar to what I want out of my photography? If the answer is yes, then obviously go for it. If the answer is no, then this pursuit is no longer just about your personal creativity. You're entering a world in which you have to hustle and compromise in order to be a success. It isn't that different from a photographer who decides to go pro and lands up only taking photographs that are commissioned by a client. I've seen a lot of photographers head down this path and lose their connection with their initial passion for photography. This is often a factor that amateurs forget. The only thing that defines whether you are a professional or an amateur is, are you earning a living through your photography? The word professional sounds really important and accomplished, but actually it's got nothing to do with actually fulfilling the desire to express oneself. Remember that Jacques-Henri Letique and Vivian Maier were amateurs. Let's look at a possible scenario. A photographer really thinks that they've created something unique, and perhaps they want to put it out in the world and see if someone recognizes their talent. This then spurs them on to complete a really major project. I would always say go for it. You've got to put your work out there if you believe it has value. At the same time, unrealistic expectations can actually be really undermining. My simple advice would be, don't let your passion be vulnerable to the subjective views of anyone else. A lot of successful creative people have a single person or maybe an imaginary person that they create for. Writer Kurt Vonnegut gave this advice: write to please just one person. If you open a window and make love to the world, so to speak, your story will get pneumonia. He only realized after his sister had died that it was her that he had been holding in mind when he wrote. John Steinbeck said a similar thing: your audience is a single reader. Forget your generalized audience. He realized that a nameless, faceless audience would scare anyone away from actually sitting down and writing. It's the same thing with photographers. When you come across a subject but you aren't clear about why or how you should go about photographing, then you can gain some clarity in your approach by imagining what you would want to say about it to your chosen person. This helps to calm down all the mental activity, because you're just thinking about creating something similar to a picture postcard that you would send to this person. So who is this person? It could be the first person you think of that you'd like to show your photograph to, or it could be the person that you think of when you want to get insightful, constructive feedback. Kurt Vonnegut pointed out that the person who influences your work and the person that you do the work for are often two different people. I was lucky enough to have an older friend and mentor called David Goldblatt. I wasn't aware at the time, but probably for 3 decades I was producing work with his voice in my head. We had spent enough time talking about all aspects of photography for me to have internalized his way of evaluating the integrity of a photograph. I think ultimately it came down to learning to be rigorous about my intent about taking a photograph, rather than anything to do with how I took the photograph. Your single chosen person could also be a composite of various people that you admire. You could imagine someone who encompasses John Sikowski's eye for innovation, Beethoven's sense of rhythm and harmony, and perhaps Mary Oliver's poetic understanding of nature. Or it could be a combination, just your mother and some famous photographer. There's something really amazing about the interaction that occurs between a photographer and another person who identifies with an aspect of your work. There's no way that they could have felt exactly the same as what you were feeling when you took the photograph. But something in the process sparks an authentic link. Somehow a magical three-way connection is being created between you, the photographer, the photograph, and the person who's interacting with the photograph. People often say things like nice photograph, or they like this and that about a photograph. But these moments of true communication are really rare. The words that get spoken are often limited. The communication is happening on another level. I remember the first time that I felt that it was possible to impact someone else on an emotional level through photography. I'd taken this photograph of a woman being comforted after being beaten by police in Cape Town. She had gone shopping, and when she was returning to work, she somehow got mixed up with the crowd involved with a political protest. She got beaten by the police, and this young woman was comforting her. The photograph had been published in a local newspaper, and a few days later I saw that a woman had cut out this photograph and pinned it to her cubicle wall. In this case, the communicated connection was a shared empathy and outrage. But in more subtle images, the communicated feelings could be anything. Although these moments have seldom occurred in my life, I think that this is now the person that I'm attempting to photograph for. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.
I believe that art is the only form of activity in which man, as man, shows himself to be a true individual and is capable of going beyond the animal state, because art is an outlet towards regions which are not ruled by time and space. To live is to believe.